With the year rapidly coming to a close, I wanted to do for this final video of 2023 a Bitcoin in review. We're going to take stock on how some of the fundamentals of Bitcoin have changed over the last 12 months and also spotlight some of the critical technical developments that we've seen unfold over the year and think about what that may mean for 2024 and beyond. Without further ado, let's jump in. So before I jump into the meat for today, I want to quickly take stock and get your feedback on what you'd like to see more of, less of, in terms of content for the new year. I really try and make the content I put out on this channel driven by your feedback. And so what I currently have planned, I definitely want to do a couple kind of more back to basics type videos, starting from absolute scratch. Maybe you have friends and family that you've been trying to orange pill who could benefit from that type of content. So a little bit of kind of back to basics. But then, don't get me wrong, there's also a lot of really, really exciting stuff as we will cover in terms of new tech proposals, soft fork proposals, dare I say, and a lot of really, really exciting development pieces that I will be covering in the new year, no doubt. There's interesting scaling proposals. We're starting to see usage of existing solutions such as sidechains like Liquid. And so as the story of Bitcoin unfolds, I think we're going to see more and more around these different layers. And so I will be sure to be covering all of that as well. I'm also excited to continue to see how this sort of pleb mining movement unfolds. We've seen open source hardware like the BitAxe. We've seen some of the interesting Bitcoin mining pool stuff with Ocean and others. I did a whole video just a moment ago on that. And then finally, for those of you that are not aware, I spend most of my time actually on Jolts, which is a Bitcoin rewards startup. We do Bitcoin rewards as a service. We build a whole host of tools for businesses to bring Bitcoin rewards into their apps, websites, stores, whatever. We have e-commerce plugins. We have an API. We're doing some really cool stuff now with Taproot assets. And those of you that have been following the channel for some time, you've seen me bring some of our partners onto the channel to give some exposure to some really interesting Bitcoin businesses. And so that is definitely something I want to continue to do as well. But let me know what you think. What would you like to see more of, less of? Let me know in the comments down below. And then finally, I just want to give a very sincere thank you to all of you that have been riding with me for however long you've been riding. Particular shout out to those of you that have been watching the channel for quite some time now. Again, when I started this a couple years back, I really had no expectation whatsoever. I thought, hey, maybe there's a few people out there that will find some of these videos helpful. And so I've been blown away at the journey so far, and I cannot wait to continue to push the envelope in 2024, bringing you more than just what's happening with the price of Bitcoin, right? There is so much more to this freedom technology, and learning the tools and understanding some of the tech behind it is crucial in your quest for becoming a self-sovereign first-class Bitcoin citizen. And so thank you to all of my subscribers, all of you that have been supporting the channel. It means a great deal. And I think we've got some exciting things in store for 2024. With all of that, let's get into the meat for today. So starting with just a pulse check on some of the fundamentals, I think this tweet from Sam Callahan is pretty noteworthy, right? A lot of people saying, oh, where is Bitcoin, all-time high? And as he's pointing out, well, there's basically every other metric is at an all-time high. And so as we can see, adoption is up. We have reached an all-time high in non-zero Bitcoin addresses, which reached 50 million just a little bit ago. Keep in mind, too, that we are still early, right? That is a small number in the grand scheme of things of, the world, but very exciting nonetheless. And then furthermore, these adopters are steely. They are determined. The percent of supply that hasn't moved in at least a year is at an all-time high of 70%. The same is true if you look at supply that hasn't moved in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. So no matter how you slice it, the number of hodlers are up, and furthermore, the number of hodlers that seem to have a more long-term orientation around Bitcoin is also up. With the halving coming up next year, that is going to result in a very interesting supply and demand dynamic. Encouragingly, we also see node counts that are up. So as we can see from James Loss, there's been a 7% increase in reachable Bitcoin nodes and an estimated 38% increase in unreachable nodes. So you'll love to see that. Tens of thousands of people all around the world running a Bitcoin node. being a truly first-class self-sovereign citizen of Bitcoin. If you are not yet among them and you're curious to learn more, I have done a whole playlist on that topic, why you might consider running a node in the first place, how to get started, how to build one from scratch, how to do more of a plug-and-play version, all of that and more in that playlist. So check that out. Across 2023, we have also continued to see hash rate absolutely rip, just relentless. We can look at that on a longer term basis here where it's pretty hard to believe, like going back to the China mining ban of 2021, you can see that that is now increasingly looking like a mere blip, when at the time, that was 50% of the hash rate just nuked. And yet here we are climbing ever higher. That is crazy, honestly, just how much it has ripped. Now, it's not all unicorns and rainbows. Some of that hash has gone to these big KYC mining pools. I did a whole video just the other week on that I would urge you to take a look at, because mining and mining centralization and some of the different emerging ways to combat that, I think is going to be a really humongous topic. But nonetheless, in many ways, it makes sense. The halving is approaching. Miners are desperately trying to get their excess supply of machines, just squeezing all the Bitcoin, all the sats that they possibly can prior to this next epoch. But then it's also made sense in the context of the way, way higher transaction fees that miners have enjoyed in 2023. As we can see here, this is a snapshot of the last 7 days as of here in late December. So keep in mind, it's just a snapshot, but it is an extraordinary one nonetheless. Bitcoin sitting here at over 100 million USD in fees generated. Ethereum sitting at about 25% less than that. And so in many ways, this is the real flippening, right? Ethereum advocates have been talking about the market cap of Ethereum flipping Bitcoin for years and years and years now. I don't think a lot of people would have had this on their bingo card in terms of transaction fees generated on Bitcoin to flip that of Ethereum. And just as context, it's been about 2 million per day on average, which is up about 400% versus last year, in great part due to ordinals, which we will discuss. But like it or not, miners are making great transaction fee revenue currently. Now, of course, that doesn't come for free, and we can see here just a view of the mempool or memory pool. The mempool is an area, and each Bitcoin node has its own mempool where pending transactions are sitting, waiting to be grabbed and packaged up into the next block. But we can see how that has trended over time in 2023. The spikes represent more mempool congestion, so more transactions waiting to be confirmed. And we can also see some very chunky high fees. So there's a lot of congestion, there's a lot of activity. People are paying really high fees. And again, a lot of that activity are these BRC20. So this is the fungible token within ordinals and inscriptions. And how these kind of fair token launches work is that you could end up having tens or even hundreds of thousands of transactions for this one token launch. And so that has been a huge contributor to all this. So again, on the one hand, great for miners, great for security budget. And yes, the security budget is real. I did a whole video on that just a little bit ago. But on the other hand, these are not purely monetary transactions. And so there's this kind of almost moral, subjective evaluation of like, do these transactions deserve to be in a Bitcoin block, to be competing for this scarce resource that is Bitcoin block space? It is an ongoing debate that will no doubt continue to unfold in 2024. But the way I see this, Bitcoin on-chain fees were always going to get here. I think we got there a little bit sooner than many would have imagined. Ultimately, these are valid transactions that are competing for scarce block space just like others. And ultimately, this forces the community's hand to really think critically about scaling solutions. And we'll talk about some of those a little bit later on in the video. So ultimately, this is going to push us to adapt to a world that we anyways were always going to get to, which is a world of high on-chain fees. There is simply no version of the future where Bitcoin has obtained any reasonable degree of success on a societal, species level basis without high on-chain fees. Those two things are simply not compatible. So again, pretty hard not to be bullish on Bitcoin at this stage. To attempt to balance out some of those all-time highs in fundamentals, it was interesting to observe that the Lightning Network really was quite stagnant in terms of network growth over 2023. We can see a couple of these different views. For one, the count of Lightning nodes. You can see that there was kind of that dip in consolidation in 2022 and has been really flat since then. Perhaps most importantly is the capacity, so how much Bitcoin is locked up in Lightning channels. And you can see that, there was a little bit of a dip and then increased once again due to, I think, certain big players rebalancing some of their channels and kind of reworking their operations a bit. But you can see that that is largely constant, if not trending slightly down across 2023. And then even on a channel basis, you can see that that is quite squarely a downtrend across 2023. Now, I do think this is partially reflective of better capital efficiency. We have more and more tools that professional Lightning node operators are using to make their operations more efficient. And so part of that means pruning underperforming channels. So I do think that is partially reflected here. But in any case, pretty interesting to see the Lightning Network as a whole, at least on a capacity level basis, that has been pretty much flat in 2023. What does that tell us? I don't know that we can draw a ton out of that just yet. But as I will mention in a little bit, I do think 2023 was a significant year in terms of the perception of Lightning and where and how it fits in to the overall Bitcoin story. More on that in just a moment. And so given all that, perhaps we should not be surprised when we see that Bitcoin's market cap dominance, so this is Bitcoin's market cap as a percentage of the total kind of crypto market cap, increased from 40 to 53% during 2023 alone. That is a pretty big jump. Now, a lot of people will say, well, this is what always happens as we kick off a new bull cycle. Bitcoin always leads, and then you have alt season and this Bitcoin dominance number comes back down. Other people will say Bitcoin dominance is not a very good measure in general. But regardless, it is pretty noteworthy. That is a pretty big delta from the start to the end of 2023. So all in all, that is a pretty gangbusters year for Bitcoin. That is a classic pre-bull run year where you see a number of these different metrics making all-time highs. Honestly, probably even more so optimistic given the degree to which some of these things are happening. Again, the degree to which hodlers are really hodling. They do not care. This whole wave of additional development now happening on Bitcoin, in some ways, the catalyst being things like ordinals and inscriptions, like them or not, but it is the case that the king is here. And all those who said, Bitcoin, it's a legacy thing of the past, it's the MySpace of crypto, it's going to get overtaken, those critics have been thoroughly silenced in 2023. But again, there are a lot of things we should be wary of, skeptical of, thinking about. You still have all sorts of potential regulatory clownery led by folks like Senator Elizabeth Warren in the US. You have some crazy stuff happening, as always, in Europe. You, of course, have all the ETF action happening. At this point, it seems all but guaranteed that we will see the first batch of these products launch in January of 2024, which I personally think is going to contribute massively as part of this next bull run. Maybe not immediately, but with a somewhat lagged effect. But then the question is if everyone's sort of buying these ETF products, and they're not able to withdraw, they're not able to take custody of that underlying Bitcoin, are we softening the network, right? And then couple that with some of these bigger mining pools that KYC all their miners and that are, and that are compliant and are going to comply to all these restrictions from government regulators. It absolutely calls for a continued stance and preparation of then they fight you, right? It can feel like we're winning, but I think we are far from a sort of ultimate victory. But in any case, with that, let's now take a tour of some of the more notable tech developments in Bitcoin over the last year. First and foremost, having to be, like them or not, ordinals and inscriptions. I did a whole video on ordinal theory and inscriptions earlier this year that you should definitely take a look at if you are new to this. And again, there's been a lot of hate on ordinals, naturally. Oh, they're spam. I don't want JPEGs on my Bitcoin blockchain. And what's notable about inscriptions, of course, is that the data is all on the Bitcoin blockchain. So you running a full Bitcoin node at home, you're downloading all that data that is getting attached in the witness section of transactions, and it's clogging up the mempool, and there's monetary transactions that may not be getting in. And what about the fact that things like Lightning, as our most promising scaling solution, still fundamentally depend on on-chain transactions to function? So it does call into question a lot of things. At the same time, these are valid transactions. If Casey Rodamore hadn't started all of this early in the year, someone certainly would have. It does teach a lesson about upgrades. So different soft forks, we can think about the SegWit soft fork and then the Taproot soft fork of 2021. Both of these have ultimately enabled stuff like this. So one could say, well, there's always going to be unintended or at least unknowable implications for these types of changes. And so it is a lesson, but again, they're valid transactions. I don't know what more we want to say, right? Like certain miners can choose to filter them out or censor them out, but then other profit maximizing miners are going to pick them up. They're certainly contributing to security budget. So net for me, I kind of net out like pretty neutral on ordinals. I certainly don't think it's right to call for the banning of them, right? Like, we should let markets operate. At the same time, I do think there are far more efficient ways to do some of what ordinals and inscriptions do. For example, fungible tokens in particular really should not be ordinals and inscriptions at all. There are far better ways to do fungible tokens on Bitcoin, including Taproot assets, RGB, where a lot of that activity is happening off-chain. You simply do not need a JSON object representing a transfer of a fungible token inscribed on the Bitcoin blockchain. So something like BRC20 tokens, I do think are fairly grotesque in their design and horrific inefficiency. But in any case, that's all I'll say there. I mentioned a couple other big updates in that monologue there, one being RGB. So RGB has continued to roll out big portions of its code base. For those not familiar, I've done a whole video on RGB, which stands for Really Good Bitcoin. And it's premised on this idea of client-side validation. It moves a lot of the computation off-chain and then publishes some sort of a proof to the Bitcoin blockchain so that different actors have the ability to verify the outcomes of different contracts. And so RGB is like a pretty big deal. It brings pretty much fully functioning smart contracts to Bitcoin. You can also do things like token issuance, but it is certainly broader than that. So RGB is very interesting. And then Taproot Assets is specifically focused on token issuance, borrowing from a lot of the same kind of design parameters and the sort of overall design paradigm of RGB as well. But Taproot Assets, of course, being developed by Lightning Labs, who raised a huge amount of money in large part to build out the Taproot Assets protocol, formerly known as Taro. And what people are very excited about there is the ability to bring stablecoins onto Bitcoin and also having the ability to move stablecoin liquidity through the existing Lightning network. How that would work is maybe I send, USDT or whatever it is, the stablecoin, it gets converted into sats, rides on the existing Lightning network rails, and then just before it gets to its recipient, it gets converted back into whatever fungible stablecoin. And so again, like it or not, there are a lot of people in the world who want to be able to save in maybe a US dollar stablecoin. I just got off a sales call with Jolt, our startup, where we were talking to a business that's entering Mexico and doing just that. So like it is a thing, even if you personally disagree with it. And at Jolt, we're also looking at Taproot Assets for a number of different loyalty related use cases. Like a lot of these big brands are never going to relinquish and give up their loyalty token, right? It has too much brand value attached to that. Said another way, Starbucks is never going to completely remove its Starbucks star and replace it wholesale with Bitcoin. But what you could do is create a fungible Taproot asset representing the, a tokenized version of the Starbucks star that's backed by sats. And so it's convertible into sats. That, I think, is how you get this huge loyalty economy bit by bit onto a Bitcoin standard. So we're doing some cool stuff there at Jolts. And if you have any interest in that whatsoever, definitely reach out. Despite the flattish network growth for the Lightning Network, we saw a ton of different development efforts. We saw support added for onion messages and route blinding, which are helpful in their own right, and also building blocks for the offers protocol, which is a big part of Bolt 12. That'll be a big deal for enabling things on Lightning like subscription payments. It's going to ultimately help with offline payments. It's going to make usability a lot better. So pretty exciting stuff there. You had Phoenix Wallet come out with splicing, which is the ability to resize an existing Lightning channel instead of having to close one and then reopen a new one. You had various proposals for things like hierarchical channels, which could allow many users to benefit from a single on-chain transaction in terms of being able to open channels, similar to other things like channel factories. So there's a lot going on to solve some of these continued pain points of Lightning. But I say continued pain points because 2023 was a year in which I think for a lot of people, they realized that maybe the Lightning Network is not the end-all be-all L2 scaling solution for Bitcoin, given that it still fundamentally requires on-chain transactions to function. With fees getting really high, a lot of these non-custodial Lightning wallets, particularly on mobile, started having a lot of issues where you'd have to receive a huge payment in that more than makes up for the channel opening cost that LSP is paying when they open a channel with you to allow you to use the Lightning Network in a non-custodial fashion. And only with these much higher fees did people start to realize, like, oh snap, Lightning Network maybe is not this kind of silver bullet. And by the way, I say that as someone who is still extraordinarily bullish on the Lightning Network, and as an entrepreneur whose company fundamentally is Lightning first. But I think the full story of Bitcoin scaling has very much yet to be written. I think we're going to see things like layer 3s, things like eCash, things like Cashew. I'm definitely going to do videos on in the new year because I increasingly think that's going to be a necessary component to all this. And so you'll probably have like Bitcoin, the base layer for ultimate settlement, like nation state to nation state type settlement. Or for those of us fortunate enough to have on-chain UTXOs, that is going to be a true real luxury in the future. Lightning Network is one layer up and is probably going to be very, very good for like business to business, facilitating global trade, enabling settlement at the kind of corporate level, business level. But then for like individual consumers, it is increasingly seeming like maybe they're ultimately destined to be on this kind of layer 3, which could be, again, an eCash or some other thing. Speaking of some other thing, we also saw the ARC proposal from Barack. This is a very interesting and novel approach to scaling. It depends on this idea of ASPs or ARC service providers, which granted would have to be pretty massive entities for what is being proposed here. I covered this in some of my past videos and will no doubt continue to cover this in 2024. But the big promise of ARC is scalability without the constraints of channel liquidity that Lightning has, which is a pretty big deal. Another highlight we saw this year was BitVM. It's still being evaluated what all is possible, but this could enable trustless contracts, trustless smart contracts on Bitcoin. Probably not kind of fully expressive like you get with an EVM, Ethereum virtual machine type engine, but nonetheless super, super exciting. Again, not a lot of people would have had that on their bingo card. You had the continued exploration of rollups. Notably, you have Rollkit and now the ability to do sovereign rollups on Bitcoin. I think one of the holy grails would be the ability to do ZK or zero knowledge rollups on Bitcoin that would allow for some very compelling trade-offs when it comes to scaling Bitcoin and also bringing a lot of attractive privacy traits. And of course, we have the continued discussion around a few notable soft fork proposals, notably around covenants. So you have CTV, check template verify, you have APO, you have Vault being kind of thrown around in there as well. I did a video on CTV quite some time ago, and this was still in its early days. And I think at the time, a lot of the proponents of it were kind of trying to rush it. And I think that threw the community off. The immune system went off and said, nope, absolutely not. But now fast forward, like there's been a 5 Bitcoin bounty out to find bugs related to the CTV spec that's been around for a long time now. That has yet to be claimed. So suffice it to say, I am planning to do an updated video on this very, very soon. So be sure you're subscribed if you're not already, because that is a super important topic and I think is one of the leading candidates for the next soft fork, whether it's in 2024 or after. But as a citizen of Bitcoin, it's something that you definitely want to be aware of and thinking about. On the privacy front, you had a draft BIP for silent payments, which would be like a reusable payment code that would help prevent output linking, which is one of the main ways that chain surveillance uses to track individuals and transactions on the blockchain, which would be very cool. Dan Gould's also been working on the PayJoin protocol. I think we're going to see some very interesting stuff there. So bottom line, there are privacy related efforts as well, which I think is super, super important, especially as we head ever deeper into this regulatory surveillance panopticon. And then lastly, as I covered in one of my last videos, we saw the first 2 mining pools commit to using Stratum v2, the next generation protocol for how mining pools communicate with constituent miners. With that said, even that is not going to be the end all be all for mining centralization. And so that is going to be a continued theme as well in 2024. So bottom line, there is a ton of stuff happening. I've been following Bitcoin closely for a number of years now, and this is just so far ahead of any other year, just in terms of the diversity of different types of proposals, scaling, privacy, L2s, usability, new use cases, like them or not, right? The amount of activity here has gotten to the point where I can really barely keep up, and I am in this space every single day. And so I think that's something to be celebrated, right? I think the community rightly should be skeptical of any new proposal or any new thing that is claiming to provide benefits without any sort of trade-offs whatsoever. But I think we're seeing a bit of a renaissance when it comes to building on Bitcoin that I ultimately think is going to be very, very good for Bitcoin and very, very good for Bitcoiners. But I'm curious to hear, what are your thoughts? What did I miss? Leave a comment down below with anything I've missed that you want to see more on or you want to hear more on. Definitely be sure you're subscribed, because there are so many pieces here that will have follow-up content in 2024, including the CTV and soft fork proposals and helping you understand what is the deal there, as well as continuing to cover all the latest and greatest Bitcoin tech and tools to help you be self-sovereign. But I hope you found this valuable and insightful. If you did, you already know what to do. Give this video a like, use the share feature underneath this video. That really does help get this to a broader audience. And if you were so enamored with this content, you want to donate to a pleb, which really does help me continue to make these videos, you can do so in a number of different ways. There's the Super Thanks feature built directly into YouTube. If you happen to be using something like the Get Alby browser extension, you can just click that. It'll automatically detect you're watching my channel. Or you can send some sats to my Lightning address, me@www.ianmajor.xyz. Or if you have any problem with that, you can use ragermajor@getalby.com. I also have a QR code here if you prefer to scan that. And for those of you that have asked how you can get in touch with me, I am using Vida. Whether you want one-on-one mentorship, or you're starting a Bitcoin business, or you want to accept Bitcoin payments for your business, you want to create a multi-sig, inheritance planning, whatever the topic, reach out to me and we can chat about it on Vida. We can set up time as well. Vida is a great platform I'm using more and more these days. But there you have it, my friends. We'll go ahead and leave this here. What a year for Bitcoin 2023. I think there are exciting things ahead in 2024 and certainly an awful lot to fight for. During this holiday season and reflecting on everything going on in the world, I am truly, truly grateful for Bitcoin, and I know a lot of you agree with that. And once again, grateful to have you guys along for the ride. As a reminder, every sat counts, and until next time, my friends, I'll see you then.